Thank you all for coming tonight. My name is Ben Huston. I'm a junior at the Virginia High School and a student representative on the Community Engagement Committee. And if all the members of that committee are up here, you can just go around and introduce yourselves.
Oh, sure. Should stand up. Hi, I'm Sue Rakowski. Oh,
So as long as we have it, you might
sure.
as well, right?
I'm Sue Rakowski. Nope.
No.
Still Sue.
Yeah, just pass it on.
Yeah,
That's
just go
just
ahead.
easier.
Okay. Oh, here we go.
Yeah, use that one.
Hi, I'm Sue Rakowski. I'm a Virgin's representative on the board, and I also serve as the chairperson. Bill will come back.
Thank you. I'm Bill Clark, the person who's now failing at AV support, but I'm also Ferrisburg rep to the school board.
Hi, everybody. I'm Christina Macklin. I'm the Ferrisburg rep on the school board and the chair of this committee.
I'm Lori Vitowski, and I'm on the board from Ferrisburg.
I'm Sheila Soul. I'm the superintendent.
I'm Elizabeth Jennings. I'm the Director of Finance and Maintenance.
I'm Keith Morrill. I'm one of the Virgin's reps on the board.
I'm Susan Oliveira. I'm a Ferrisburg resident and teacher representative on the committee.
So first off tonight, we will be giving our presentation on the proposed plans on school closures and the restructuring of our district. This will include some of where we have been, how we got here, and a review of all the proposed scenarios the district school board has reviewed and considered. Please note your questions as we go through the presentation, as we will take any of your comments and questions at the end after the presentation is completed. Also tonight, we would like to ask each of you to take the time to fill out our exit card that has questions about tonight and also questions about the ANWSD school vision statements. Also, we would like to establish a few ground rules that hopefully everyone can agree to. Some of these were also used at the community forums last October and November. So some ground rules would be respectful, share the air, time limit for each speaker will be 3 minutes, an effort to make sure everyone is heard, and assume good intentions. Can everyone agree to these rules?
Yes, but I wanted to ask, because I was there last night, is there any way that people can stop when you're doing the presentation to ask questions along the way instead of waiting to the end after you talk an hour when someone has a question from the beginning to ask something small, so it doesn't go into what happened last night?
Thanks, Jeannie. The question for those of you who didn't hear it is, as we're giving the presentation through the scenarios, Jeannie was asking if we could stop and accept questions during that scenario. We actually had a conversation about this. You're not going to like the answer. We had a conversation about that earlier about, I tried to do that a little bit yesterday, and I think it slowed us down a bit. So I apologize that we're going in a direction different than what you wanted, but I will make sure that when I'm facilitating questions and answers later, that if we need to pop back to the slides, we can do that. So hopefully, thank you, Jeannie. I appreciate your flexibility. I'm sorry.
No, I'm off.
We're done.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's Keith.
Oh, so Keith, so.
Hello. Thank you all for coming. Just to get started, we're going to take a look at the district's vision statement, which kind of calibrates everything that we do as a board. So hopefully it will help us calibrate everything that we're doing here tonight. So we're asking you to give us feedback on as well. So it seems like a great place to begin. As a district, we envision a kind, collaborative, and creative community for all nurtures a diverse and accessible learning environment. Students will flourish as critical thinkers and productive citizens, cultivating resilience in an ever-changing world. So really quickly tonight to get started, we'll talk about Act 46. I don't really want to debate the merits of Act 46. We could do that tonight. But just to talk about how we arrived where we are as a district and some of the things that have resulted because of Act 46 in our schools. We, 2 years ago, I'm sorry, I came on board in March, so my institutional memory is a little short. We merged school boards 2 years ago. We had separate boards for each school. We are now a unified board. That was probably the biggest result of this merger. In terms of what it got us, it mostly got us efficiency in some operations. Facilities management, for example, is now under the umbrella of a single director of facilities. That allows us to be more efficient in ordering of products, things like paper products or different school supplies are now done in bulk for the district and are put in as a bid from single companies instead of separate operations for each school, for example. And I'm not going to go through all these in detail. If you have questions, you can do that. But we have shared programs throughout the district and with Mount Aid in several instances, athletics, food programs. These have allowed us to be more efficient in a lot of the ways that, that facilities management has. We can order in bulk. We can have fewer redundancies in various areas. This next one reduced 2 director positions at central office by creating middle management positions. I won't go into too much detail on this because Sue will talk about it later in the presentation, so we'll just keep cruising. 2 of the principal positions, the one here at FCS and the position at ACS, were reduced from full-time to just 205 days. General and improved fiscal services. Before our business manager came on board, we had no business manager. This was the result of an administrative decision a number of years back. That decision led to a number of difficulties in the district itself, including not completing annual audits, or if they were completed, not completing them on time, not filing various important reports that got us direct funding. So oftentimes we were not getting funding we would have otherwise been getting as a district as a result of this. Since we have reacquired a business manager, we have changed that, obviously. Our audits are done annually, they're done on time. Those reports are all filed, getting the funding that we should be getting. Yeah, and in terms of, there's been more equitable opportunities in the district as a result. The Fusion program is an example that started here at FCS this year. It's been implemented already at VUAS and ACS. So we've seen expansion of program, some programs as a result of this. Why are we considering reorganization within the district? The primary reason is declining enrollment. It really comes down to that. I'm just going to click ahead really quickly. So this is in both past enrollment and enrollment projections up through 2024. It's been on a steady decline for quite a while now and will continue to decline. The estimate is that it will hopefully bottom out around 2024 and stay level. But yeah, it's a numbers game. As a result of declining enrollment, we receive less funding as a district, plain and simple. And I won't go into too much detail about per pupil spending. This is something we'll cover in greater detail for the sake of time and getting to your questions sooner. Some of these I'll gloss over. But there has, moving forward, the hope is that by putting focus on programming rather than on buildings, we can help build equity within the district. Right now, we essentially have one elementary school spread out across 3 different buildings. The hope would be that by reducing the number of actual buildings as much as possible, we could then focus that money on where it's important, which is programming. If we fail to do that, we have to start cutting programming. It's as simple as that. We're down to a point where we've cut all the extras that we can cut, and most likely cuts will start happening at the high school. And again, these are things we'll go into greater detail, so I'm not going to jump into it too much now. Yeah, maintaining programming is really what it's about. We're here for kids. We're here to make sure that our students have as many opportunities as possible, and that comes down to maintaining the educational offerings we currently have.
Okay, it's my turn. And I'm old school. I've got notes, so it would help if I did this slide. Okay, here we are. Yeah, sure. So this
slide, oh, actually, my slide, the next slide. There we are, Equalized Peoples. So I thought I would start with just a brief definition of what an equalized pupil is. So the Agency of Education calculates this each year using a formula. And you would think it would be the exact head count, but it's not. The formula basically is they weight pre-K students a little less. They weight extra, they give extra weight to secondary school pupils. They give extra weight to students that come from economically challenged backgrounds. And then they give extra weight to students whose first language is not English. And then from there, the Vermont legislature sets a base amount each year that schools in Vermont can spend per pupil. And you get penalized if you go over that rate that they set. So just to sort of add a little perspective, in the 2016 US Census, the national average for per pupil spending was $11,762. And at that time, we were in the top 5 in the country for per pupil spending, and we came in at $17,873. And our per pupil spending this year, it was set at $18,311. So as you can see from this diagram up here, once we go right where we're at now in FY20, we were just slightly over the state cap for per pupil spending. And we were able to offset that this year because we had some debt service credit that we were able to apply and get below the threshold, so we were not penalized. For FY21, we have less debt service to apply to this situation. So this slide is here to basically illustrate what happens if we don't do anything. So for next year, we're looking at if we want to basically not go over the threshold, we need to cut $955,000 next year. In 2022, we have to cut another $1.2 million. In 2023, another $1.8 million. And then in 2024, $2.1 million more. So basically, that adds up to about $6 million over 4 years. So if no changes are made this year, the costs just continue to compound, and it's going to cause more severe cuts across the board. Scenarios that could conceivably happen would be the loss of sports, the loss of art, possibly world language, AP, Walden program, after school and enrichment opportunities, transportation. I mean, you get the idea here. If we don't do anything, that's what we're going to be looking at. And possibly even further down the road, closing the high school. So this slide just sort of shows where we're at today. In Addison Central, we're at 36% capacity with 60 students. Here at Ferrisburg, we're at 58% with 144 students. The elementary school in Virgins, 218 at 57%. And then at the high school, 58% capacity with 456 students.
That is the next one. That's,
Here we go.
this is the next one.
So this slide basically illustrates what happens if we continue, to do nothing, where we're going to be. So compared to the previous slide, ACS, we were at 60 students today, and 60, it goes by 2024, we're going to be at 64 students. Ferrisburg, we are going from, it basically stays the same. The elementary school in Virgins goes from 218 to 211, but where you see the biggest hit is in the high school, because these groups of students get smaller and smaller. By the time 2024 gets here, we're going to be down 100 students at the high school, which is pretty significant. So, you know, we're faced with the question, how are we going to address this?
So this is the part where we talk about what the current conditions of our current financial status are. Our current budgets, and looking back at fiscal year 19, that was the year you just ended. We just barely had our audit. They're not final at this time, but they're still working on the audit, and so they're pretty close to finished. It's looking like in that year, we're going to come very close to the amount that we had budgeted, so we're not going to have a sizable surplus, if any, to roll forward into the next year's budget. For fiscal year 20, the budget is about $1 million higher than last year. And what we're looking at, even though we're in the early part of the current fiscal year, we try to encumber and estimate everything we think the district's going to spend at a very early time during the year to see where we're going to end. And there are some things that come around that we realize right in the beginning are going to cause us to have to try to find funds in other areas. For instance, if we negotiate a higher salary than what we budgeted, which we actually did this year a little bit. And also, we just discovered that the amount we budgeted for health insurance is now going to go even higher than what we estimated. We estimated 11%, thinking that was pretty high, and it went to 12.9. So those are just a couple of little examples that cause our budget to kind of go awry very early in the school year. And for fiscal year 21, we did a projection, and based on keeping every single program and doing everything as is, that's the do-nothing scenario for fiscal year 21 and what our expenditures would look like, with similar raises, similar increases in health insurance and other benefits. And I will elaborate on some of the other reasons why those things go up in the next slide. That would cost us the $22,972,624. Now we also looked at what would it take to get us below the threshold in that scenario. And we realized that because even though the delta between those two dollar amounts is not $955,000, there's other factors considered. When your expenditures go down, you don't receive as much revenue. Some of those revenues are calculated based on what you spend in certain areas, and it's not true for everything, but it's true in some of the cases. So in order to reduce ourselves below that state threshold that Christina was talking about, we would need to cut that budget by $955,000 to stay below the threshold. And just as a point, we wanted to point out that last year's budget, when we voted in the fiscal year 20 budget we're currently in, we only got that budget approved by 6 votes. So that's kind of telling to our board and to everybody that possibly people may have been thinking that that budget was too high. And that's just an assumption that's pretty much made in any community, I think, when you have a budget that doesn't pass by very much. There could be other varying reasons, but that's usually the assumption. Okay, so this is, I'm going to start with the pie chart over here, because that's very interesting. So this is the current fiscal year 20, by expense type. So what we wanted to show here is how do we spend our money currently? And I don't know if you guys in the back can even read this, probably not, so I'll read it to you. So the largest section of the pie, where you see is in a bluish color, is 68%. That is the salaries and benefits for all the staff in the entire district. That's teachers, support staff, food service, custodial, maintenance, administration, that's everybody. That's what it costs for the salaries and benefits. The next section, which is the orange, and that is 6%, is professional contracted services. Those could be services directly to students. It might be other support services, conference fees, and things like that for staff. That's all contracted services. The small sliver you see in between the orange and the yellow is gray. That is 1%. That is rent, lease, space, and equipment. So that's the central office lease. It's the lease of our copier machines, not only at our office, but also out in the schools. There are some small rental fees that we pay, for instance, for the Walden program at the high school. So that's all included in that gray section. The yellow is 14%, that's other purchase services. Now that sounds a lot like contracted services, but it's actually very different. That is your telephone service, your postage, your internet, your transportation. Those are all those kind of services in that section. The lighter blue color is 5%, that's your supplies and your equipment, and that is district-wide supplies and equipment, every single department included there. The green is 2%, that's dues, fees, and interest. So those are typically membership dues, they might be fees on our bank accounts, and it's also interest on any debt service that the school district has. And the last section there is 4%, it's a dark blue. That is the principal payments on the debt service and fund transfers. And I'll tell you that for fund transfers in these budgets, that is usually just the contribution that the school district general fund makes to the food service program. So that's what that fund transfer is that's embedded into that number. So the drivers of our increases, as I stated before, the health care benefits are going up 12.9%, and that's going into fiscal year 21. We just found that out about a week ago. The salary and other benefits, typically they range anywhere from 3.25% to 4.75%. Now that's not just a raise. We don't typically give raises of 4.75%, so I want to point that out. But there are a lot of benefits that kind of vary in that range. So between the increases in salaries and the increases that life insurance, dental insurance, and all those other benefits go up, the average becomes a range. We have property liability insurance services, supplies, and equipment. What we use to calculate those in an estimated budget scenario is the CPI, which is Consumer Price Index. We usually typically look at everything when we're trying to budget and decide what percentage increase to use as a marker. We look at how much our price index want specifically versus the national average. And then we also look at inflation rates, both in Vermont and nationally, and try to decide which one we should use. And typically, the national CPI is the most common and consistent. So that's the one we used for this. Transportation. Currently, we're under contract for our transportation services. We have another couple of years where we're seeing a 3% increase on those contracts. And we're locked in with that percentage until fiscal year 23. After that, we're hearing from other neighboring districts that your prices could go up by 8% average on those contracts for the service. And then the other factor, which is not really an increase, but it does affect you, as I spoke before about the reduced revenue. Some of these revenues are formula driven by how much you spend, and also they are making laws and legislation in the state that affect our funding, like Act 173 for special education funding formula. That funding formula used to be based on what we spent for special education, and there was a formula, and now that's all going to change coming soon, and they're going to start mapping us all to a one common kind of like block grant amount. And in our case, we've done the studies, and our revenue, we're one of the districts that are going to be moving down to their mark versus moving up to their mark. So our revenue will decline where some school districts will increase to whatever that mark is that the state sets. Okay, and so this slide was added after last night because I talked about it while I was standing up at Addison, but we didn't have it as part of the slide, so we added it today so that we could show it on the big screen. So this is the same exact expenditures as you saw in the last slide, and I thought this one was interesting. I did this one differently because I broke apart the expenses and how we spend our money, not by the expense type, you know, not salaries, not benefits, not how that money is spent in that way, but what departments are we spending our money on? How much money are we spending on our students versus administration or transportation or debt service, food service, or any of those other things? So this chart, the large blue section says 55% for those that maybe can't see it in the back. That is direct student services. So those are the services that are directly to all students. They could be anything from direct instruction in a classroom all the way through to co-curricular activities and tuition to our vocational school. So those are actual student-driven costs. And then if you look at the next orange section, it even looks blurry to me here, but I remember the percent. It's 13%. And that is student support services. So there again, those are direct services to students, but it's a support kind of service. So those are your guidance services, nursing, maybe speech language services, psychological services. It also includes things like curriculum and improvement of that instruction for the students. And interesting to me was that when you add those two sections of student-driven numbers together, you get 68%, which if we look at the slide before that, the salaries and benefits percentage for the whole district is also 68%. It was a little bit uncanny how that kind of worked out. The next section is gray, and that is 8%. That is the administration piece of this pie. So that includes anyone who is administration in the offices of the principals, so that could be the administrative assistants, but also the principals in those offices, all the expenses that are associated with them. It includes the office of the superintendent and the district services, so that's that gray section. The next section in yellow is 6%. That is the business, technology, and wellness services. So business is my department. That's basically people doing all the financial data. The technology is pretty obvious who that is. That's all of our IT staff working with not only students, but keeping our technology up to date. And then the wellness department also. The next blue section, and I'm having trouble reading that one. Anybody see what that actually says? It's O&M, but what's the percentage on there? Is it 6? I thought it was, yeah, it might be 8. It looks like 8. Sorry, guys. Okay, so that's 8%. That is operations and maintenance. That is our maintenance and facilities staff. And then we have the transportation, which is in green. I believe that's 5%. And that's pretty clear what that is. The next section is debt service. That's 4%. That, of course, in this situation is all the debt, including the interest. And the last little slice of the pie is 1%, and that is your food service contribution.
So a timeline of all the sort of involvement that the committee and the CEC has had, as well as the school board, has been in April. There was a board retreat and press release regarding declining enrollment. And throughout March 2018 and May 2019, there have been multiple community conversations, forums, and surveys, as well as board discussions. And in, I believe, May, the school board started to discuss reconfiguration scenarios, which is, of course, why we're here today. And as far as the future goes, tomorrow the board will be voting on a final plan to put forward to the two towns. And there will be select board meetings within Addison and here in Ferrisburg when October 1st. And in mid-October, there will be a couple regular board meetings and school closure votes on October 5th. No, sorry, November 5th. November 5th, and later in December and early January, there will be budget planning based on however the school closure votes go down. And under our current policy, policy C40, K through 6 students are assigned, as we know, to our district schools based on the town in which they reside. So of course, Addison students go to Addison, Ferrisburg to Ferrisburg. And under any scenario being considered for reconfiguration, this policy must be revised and students must be reassigned.
It's not, that's not allowed.
Okay, never mind.
And students must be reassigned to district schools accordingly.
All right. Oh, here's the part where I'm looking at it going, oh, this isn't PowerPoint, so.
Present.
Is it this one right here?
No,
Click
on the
present.
right.
Top right, top left?
Yep, top right.
And, oh, this is where it says present. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, good. We're even on the right slide. So as we moved into this, we had a couple of goals and assumptions that we wanted to start with. And the first one was to make sure we were improving equity across our district. The second one was to maintain the benefits that we had to the students. We wanted to make choices that would benefit the students the most, and especially preserve programs at the high school level. They've been subject to a lot of cuts over the years. It's a larger budget. It's easier to find spots to cut there, and we wanted to preserve that. Next, we wanted to make sure that we were maintaining programs as a priority over just maintaining buildings. So focusing on keeping the programs intact, even if that meant that the buildings were less of a priority to us. We wanted to, and you're going to hear a little bit about this in the next couple of slides, and then Sheila's going to talk a little bit more about this, but there is a lot of support across the administration, and I think even in our community, to make sure that we're dedicating ourselves to the middle level learning. So we want to make sure that we're dedicated to the middle school levels. So we'll talk more about that in a little bit. And ideally, retrofit some space within one of our buildings for the central office. So those were our major goals and assumptions. Now I want to walk through the scenarios that we considered. And this took up the bulk of our day on August 22nd when we met as a board to go through these scenarios. So I want to go through these. This would be a great time to take notes because I suspect there will be a lot of questions about these. And as I said to Jeannie earlier, we can bump back to these if you want to see these again. So the first scenario we looked at was to put pre-K through 5 at the Virgins Elementary School and then 6 through 12 at VUHS. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this other than to just point out that it would just be too full. We wouldn't have the space to do this at Virgins Elementary School with that many grades. So we ruled this one out as not a viable option. The next scenario we considered was one that kind of went against one of our priorities, which was to focus on programs over buildings. So we thought, well, let's take a look at it. How could we make this work where we still had students learning in each of our 4 buildings? And so we looked with a model where we were doing pre-K through 2 in both Addison and Ferrisburg, and then pre-K through 5, and then 6 to 12 at the buildings in Virgins. And there were some pros and cons about this, but the real big problem here, and I'll go through the pros and cons in a minute, but the biggest con is we just really didn't see any significant cost savings, certainly nothing that would meet our budget goals. And so that one was easily ruled out. I mean, there are some pros and cons. Obviously, we would have some room for the central office in Ferrisburg. We did that. There would be room at Addison Central School for perhaps some innovation like maybe early child care or something like that. So there were some definite advantages, but the main problem here is we really can't get to our cost goals with a scenario where we kept all 4 buildings open, even if we cut some of the grades out of Addison and Ferrisburg. Okay, so for scenario 3, this one is the scenario where we have pre-K through 4th grade at the Virgins Elementary School and grades 5 through 12 at the high school. So the middle school would be grades 5, 6, 7, 8, and then the traditional high school grades. With this one, this was the one where we found the most significant cost savings. The projections that we have, and these are just early projections and estimates because there are a lot of variables we don't know yet, variables that come from the state that haven't been calculated. But we're presuming that this model could keep us under the threshold for perhaps 5 years before we'd have to make any other major changes. So some of the pros, the first one, and I'm not going to steal Sheila's thunder like I did, but just suffice it to say for now, Sheila's going to get into this, but the idea of designating a real commitment to our middle school learners, so it's not just 2 grades, having some more continuity and consistency for them, and just having a little more time in those middle grades. And Sheila will talk a little bit more about that. even though I really want to. So that was a big one. The other great part about this is it keeps the middle school in the high school building, and so things like maker spaces or industrial arts or science, just the needs for kids at middle and high school level, the equipment and the lab space that they need is just different than what you would find at an elementary school science program. So that was an advantage for this one. It gives, it increases the opportunity and especially equity in things like having music and band in for every one of our elementary school learners. Right now, that's not the case for everyone. Sports become a little more consistent, although we have made great strides with that in the last few years since we've unified. And then for physical education, right now, there's only one school that has access to a pool, and I think only 2 schools who have access to an ice rink. I don't believe Addison has one right now. So, these are nice things, nice ways for us to improve equity and consistency across. The goal here, it's a drag to lose one or more schools in any of these scenarios that are viable. But one of the things that we hope will happen is the community will be able to come together. We'll talk more about that a little bit later on, but getting the community to come together and rally behind wherever your kids wind up, whether you liked it or not, that's going to be their school. We've got to make that the best thing we can. So we all have opinions about where we should go from here. Lots of strong, smart opinions and widely varied, I'm sure. But in the end, our district is going to have to come to some solution. And the hope is that there would be opportunities for us to really rally behind whatever happens in the end to make this the best we can for our kids. This option, as I mentioned, saves money. This has the greatest cost savings. There's transportation infrastructure already in place, although those buses, all the buses eventually find their way to the high school. We would need to make some minor modifications to the routes to get them to the elementary school buildings in this scenario. It does not allow space for central office within the schools that are already open and operating, so there would not be room at either the elementary school in Virgins or the high school for the district offices under this model, just not enough space. There may be some minimal renovations needed to retrofit some of our space with this option and with several of the other options as well. We'll get into that. All right, so that's scenario 3. For scenario 4, with this one, we had Ferrisburg holding pre-K through 2nd grade, Virgins having grades 3 through 5, and the high school having grades 6 through 12. So that's what this scenario looks like. My buddy Elijah over there is getting a little grumpy. All right. But we're glad he's here though, Mary. All right. So 81% capacity for Ferrisburg. If we did that, we would have 45% at 63. So there's room for it. And let's talk a little bit about some of the advantages and disadvantages. So, I should back up a little. So with this scenario, again, we have savings that would be sufficient to bring us under the threshold. Based on the projections that we have, these savings would keep us under the threshold for perhaps 2 years, so fewer years than with the scenario 3 model. The other advantage is, so some of the pros is, just like with model 3, option 3, we would have a designated middle school, so that commitment would be there. And these, I should say, I see a couple of you taking pictures occasionally of these slides, and feel free to do that. But if you're looking for these, all of these are available through the resources page on the ANWSD website. There's a district restructuring button that you can click on, and you can find all these in here to look at later. So moving right along, again, middle school would be in a building that already has a lot of the technology and equipment that we need for science, technology, engineering, and math, and makerspace. There would be the same increased opportunity, not quite as much because it would be spread over a couple of different buildings for elementary school, but we would definitely be creating a little more consistency in the experience for kids, because at any particular grade, everybody in the district from that grade will be in one school. It does save money, it's more efficient, but as I pointed out, we don't stay below the threshold for as long with this scenario as we would with scenario 3. There is definitely space for central office, perhaps within, within Ferrisburg or Virgins Elementary. That would be yet to be determined. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the need for what that would look like if we had the district office in one of our elementary schools, some of the security concerns around that. There's the potential with any of these, I'll just talk about this for a minute. We talked about it yesterday. it is very likely that one or more schools will close in this scenario, and if and when that happens, it's certainly going to be emotional for many of us. It's going to be a drag. It might not be what many of us want, but there's an opportunity to look at it this way. So if we went with scenario 3, where Ferrisburg and Addison schools cease to operate, we would be really, in a sense, closing all 3 elementary schools and then moving everybody to the school that now houses the Virgins Union Elementary School. You're going to see a totally different configuration of teachers. It's going to look like a totally different school. And so there's an opportunity with any of the models where we close a school to look at renaming schools, combining PTOs, not just saying, you know, you've got to blend into what's already there. We can create new things to support our students. We can vote on new mascots, new school colors if we want. Now, I know that that's probably little consolation for those of you who are upset about potentially losing the school, but it's worth pointing out that that's one of the things we can rally behind if we come to that. So some of the cons with Model 4 is we would have more transportation needs because we'd be pulling kids potentially from you know, the southern end of Addison all the way up to going to Ferrisburg in the early years. So there would be some more transportation challenges with that. There would be some building retrofit needed, and I guess I could just really briefly touch on the idea that the central office has lots of people coming and going. It's a business office. It's not a school. It's not controlled like a school. If you come into the school, you sign in. If you're volunteering in the classrooms, you have to have a background check. So there are a lot of controls, but for the business office, it's not the case. It's just adults in there. These aren't learners. So we would need to make sure that we have it walled off with a separate entrance, separate bathrooms, so that we're not blending members of the public in with the kids. We just want to make sure that we control access. And some of the buildings would be less utilized. The less full we make our buildings, the less efficient it is to run them. So they're, you know, and that's really projected in the end with fewer savings compared to Model 3. We also were asked to consider a model that would create a completely separate middle school space for grades 5 through 8. And so we looked at doing something where pre-K through 4 was in Ferrisburg, and that we would have an actual middle school at what is now Virgins Elementary School with grades 5 through 8 in the high school in its current configuration. The biggest problem with that, you know, after running the numbers, it's just we don't have space here for the 313 students that we would need under that model. So this one was easily ruled out as not viable. Scenario 5 is the last scenario to go through. For this scenario, we have pre-K through 5 in Ferrisburg, kindergarten through 5 in Virgins Elementary School, and then grades 6 through 12 in the middle/high school configuration. So again, the savings look good. They get us under the threshold, but they're not going to last as long as they would for the other scenarios that keep us under the threshold longer. But you know, at least for the immediate term, there are definitely savings there. There are a couple of pros that match what we've already talked about before. So we've got a middle school, a real commitment to middle school. The middle school would be in the building. I'm sorry, this is. Yeah, sorry, I confused it with the other. So the middle school would be in the building that already has a lot of the infrastructure we need for science, technology, engineering, math, industrial arts, makerspace. So a lot of that's there. There would be room for the central office within an operating school. But some of the cons, we've got similar challenges with transportation. There would need to be quite a few retrofits to make this work. Some of the buildings, again, as we mentioned before, would be less utilized, and so less utilization means less efficiency, which calculates to less in savings. And one of the big ones is we would still have equity of learning issues because you'd really be having kids in similar grades in different, so you'd have pre-K through 5 and K through 5. So there, like we have today, there would be 2 totally different schools, so you wouldn't have all your 3rd graders in the same school, for example, under that model. Okay, now I'm going to hand it off to Sheila. I didn't take too much of it.
I don't think we need that. So why is middle school a priority? Every model that we have forwarded prioritizes a change at the middle level. Currently we have excellent middle level teachers, but we offer a true middle level experience in grades 7 and 8. So in each of the scenarios we're considering, we're expanding that by 1 or 2 grades. So So what we know about middle level programming for students, middle level ages, 10 through 14, grades 5 through 9, it's a time of extraordinary change for students, and a lot of growth and development happens during that time period. So it's really critical that when we think about curriculum and instruction and programming, that we're doing that with an eye toward those developmental needs for students. In a middle level environment, you really want to prioritize the relationship building between students and adults and students and one another. Those relationships really carry them through what is sometimes considered a turbulent time in their lives. And it's critical that we really carve out time and space for them to grow and develop in healthy and safe ways. We want to make sure that we have educators who value working with this age group of students. They're unique in lots of ways, middle level learners, and the educators who really enjoy and value those kinds of learning environments are the ones we want to have in the classrooms with students. We want to make sure our health and wellness policies really are appropriate for students in those age ranges, and that we focus on building strong family and community partnerships for students in those grade ranges. So I've linked a lot of research and other information from this slide. I've also created a separate section on the website, so if you're interested in learning more about middle level education and why it's such a priority for us, I'm happy to talk more about that or go through some of these research documents with you at any point.
So we've received a lot of questions and feedback about central office, and so we wanted to make sure that we touched upon this tonight too. I just want to say that it's, you know, the board and the administration are always on the lookout for ways to save costs and increase efficiencies. And these are some of the changes that have happened within the central office recently. So Keith touched on this earlier, but there have been a couple positions that have been cut and duties consolidated. So had 6 directors or like department heads, that's been reduced down to 4, or will be at the end of this year, reduced down to 4. And at the same time, some of those duties are being pushed down to a middle management position. So I know that there was a position recently posted for data manager. And what that is that's a person that's going to be taking the place of our director of technology, because the director of technology and the director of learning positions have been combined into one. So it results in a cost savings. Right? And the other one, I think. HR. Oh, right. Right. And a similar thing happened with our HR director, and combining that with some payroll benefits information. So if you look on the website, there is a chart that compares our central office staffing with the other districts in Addison County, as well as with a lot of districts throughout Vermont that are relatively the same size as ours in terms of student numbers. And you can see that the numbers of the folks in our central office are pretty typical. We fall right in the mid-range. There's about 15 and a half folks in our, considered in our central office staff. For Addison County, the range is 15 and a half to 18 and a half. If you look at comparably sized districts, the range is actually from 7 up to 19. So we're pretty much right in the middle. And you know, the essential duties of these folks doesn't change really given the number of students or the decline in students. Like, there still needs to be an audit done. There still needs to be, you know, a certain number of pages filed for this grant and that grant, and all the other work that's done there. So some of their duties are the state and federal filing, oversight of district resources. You know, I don't need to read through that for you, but basically they're the ones that are keeping the district running. Another thing that I just wanted to note that's not on the slide is if you're looking at district costs over time, there's been a lot of shifting, particularly since our unification. So there are a lot of costs now. If you look at a line item that's, you know, says central office or administrative office, there are a lot of costs now that have been shifted into that line item that previously were dispersed amongst the schools themselves. like special education came in there a few years ago, and again, as Keith mentioned earlier, we now have a district-wide maintenance head versus folks based at the building levels. So when we talk about options for locations moving forward, as Bill said, we really want to just make sure that we are cognizant about student safety. That's really the main concern. So when you have people coming and going that are background checked and like Bill just said. I won't, no, I won't repeat all that. But you know, basically there's 3 options. You know, you continue to rent, we renovate some space in one of the buildings that we own, or we build something new. And we would be looking to find what would be the most cost-effective and effective of those 3 options. So, what's next? Holding votes in the towns is a way for the board to get the most input because it puts it out to every single voter in the towns. So that is an important point. If the votes go out and if they don't pass, what happens to the buildings? So if the vote doesn't pass, then the buildings will continue to operate as educational facilities, meaning that there'll be students maintained in all of those buildings. But the grade configurations inside of those buildings will likely change through the policy change that was referenced earlier. If the board brings it to a vote and it does pass, what happens next? So the default, as it stands in our articles, is that the district retains the buildings for operational use of the district. And then if it's decided that the buildings are no longer needed for the district use, it would go out to a vote of the 5-town community because those buildings are now district property. So if the voters of 5 towns approve the sale, then the default sale is to the town that had originally owned the building. And what the articles state is that the sale would be for $1 with assumption of the debt on that building. What can we gain if we select one of the scenarios? What we hope to gain is equity and opportunity for all of our students pre-K to 12th grade, as well as more efficient and affordable district operations. So that brings us to a close. I'm going to turn it over to Bill. He's going to moderate our question and answer period. So
great.
I'll let him lay down the rules.
All right, thanks, Sue. So Ben mentioned the rules earlier, but just to keep us all on the same page. Obviously, we're going to be respectful. I think we're all intelligent people here, and so I don't think that's going to be a problem. This one is tricky. We've got to share the air to make sure everybody has a chance to speak. I think yesterday we had a great time with question and answers, but I feel like we probably could have gone another 3 hours and people still had lots of questions. There are many more people here tonight than we had yesterday. So I would ask that you try to keep your, maybe just a couple of quick comments or 1 or 2 quick questions. I do want to cycle through everybody who has a question once first before we get back to somebody for a second question. So if there are 3 things you'd like to ask and one of them is really important, please use that first. And likewise, if somebody asks a question that's already very similar to something you've already asked, then either go with that answer or maybe check in with us after. Many of us will hang out here after if you want clarification. Please assume that there are good intentions. I think everybody in the room, we all here have good intentions. We know all of you do. In the end, we all care about our kids in our district, even if we feel like different directions should be taken. We're all here because we care about our kids. How many of you would rather just be home right now watching TV? I mean, I know how busy all of you are. Yeah, I know we're all really busy, but we're here because we love this district and we love our students. And finally, I want to just point out that it's perfectly okay to just make a comment. If you ask a question, be clear about that, and we'll make sure that we get an answer for you. But you may just want to say, hey, I really like where you're going with this, or I'm really not happy with where you're going with this, or I want you to consider this opinion, I don't need an answer. Just let us know that. It's perfectly okay. We may or may not choose to respond to that if it just feels like it's a statement, but if you want your question answered, make sure. Okay, with that, please, yes? Oh, great, great. Ben's going to walk around. Yeah, okay, that's good. Thanks, man. Is the light on? Okay, great. So Ben will take questions. So if you can start by raising your hand and if you've got questions, we'll get you going. Okay, no questions. Have a great day. We can start with, I think your hands up first. Yeah.
I'm Lisa Watkins. I've been living in Harrisburg for decades now. And thank you very much for all the hard work as a former school board member.
I got it.
It's on.
It's on.
There you go.
How's that?
I know he's good.
Okay, once again, I'm Lisa Watkins. Thank you for the work that you're doing on the board and at the administrative level. I know it's really hard work and I appreciate the effort, and everybody here, thank you for being part of this wonderful community. I had a question about some of the projections that you had up there, specifically looking at the next, however many half dozen years. I assume that that's based on birth rate and that you have specific information from the state to base your calculations on. Given our proximity to Chittenden County and its continued growth and the fact that it's certainly North Harrisburg and Harrisburg are increasingly a bedroom community, I wonder if there's any sense, for Burlington, I wonder if there's any sense of whether that has an impact on the population and if those factors are taken into consideration when you look at the projected number of kids in the schools.
So there is, wow, very loud. There is birth rate data available on our website, which I don't know if Andy's here. I did send that document, so you can pull that up on the screen. And the strongest correlation between our enrollment data is what we use going forward. So when we look at birth rates over the last several years and then how that translates to kindergarten enrollment, those are the correlating and consistent factors that we use in projecting enrollment. The good news is it looks like once we have students, we really keep them. So our grade levels stay around the same size right up through. They may not be the actual students right up through, but we retain approximately the same number of students, so we catch those in place. But our birth rate data is not going up. So your question is more about what might happen in the future, and it's hard to say what will happen in the future.
My question was specifically about the demographic shift from potentially parts of Chittenden County down to the northern parts of Addison County, and whether you have any projections based on that. Looking at real estate transactions, looking at jobs, and the increase in employment opportunities.
Right. We don't have that. We don't have that specific.
I think you need that information.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Mary, you have your hand up next.
Let me try.
Hi, I just wanted to thank you guys for coming up with another scenario, because it was pretty apparent that no one liked the scenario before at the last board meeting. So thank you for coming up with another one, and I'd like to support that one. Both of the scenarios that, well, the option 3 and the 5th one, they gave us between 2 and 5 years, and then we're out of time. Can I do this?
He's just plugging in, he's trying to get a feed for the people at home.
So what are we going to do in 5 years when we close all our buildings and we have nothing left to cut? Are we just going to merge with another district? It seems like we don't have a long-term plan for what's going to happen regardless, and these are really big changes to just only get a couple years off of.
Any thoughts on where this takes us after 2 to 5 years, depending on the scenario?
I think probably anyone could answer that, but I would say it's very likely that we would eventually merge with some other districts in Addison County. We're not the only ones experiencing declining enrollment, so these factors that we're experiencing are true for other schools. And if we want to retain programming and we want to retain all of the things that we are now able to offer for high school students, for example, we will need to continue to partner with our other area schools in order for that to happen. And further efficiencies could be found by merging with other districts. You know, those central office expenses, for example, if merged at a larger level, that's one way to get at those costs. So I think it's not only likely, it might even be our preferred path forward as we look to face further cuts.
Thank you, Sheila. Yeah. One second. Oh yeah, okay, so just clarifying that scenario 5 gives us really 1 year. After the second year, we'd be looking at some other options. And I believe it was scenario 4 that perhaps got us 2. And then scenario 3 perhaps gets us 5. But suffice to say, we're not done. You know, it's not like the system we have in place has been in place for decades. The system we're about to build is likely not going to be in place for decades. We're still changing. Okay, next question, please. Yes, Rebecca.
I'll be quick, Rebecca.
Oh, okay, we'll get Kate first.
Okay.
Go ahead.
This is just good timing because it's another high school related question. And prepare for controversy because what I'm about to say is a maybe really far out there idea. But I've been thinking a lot this month about what the long-term plan is, where, as Mary said, this will get us in 2 to 3 to 5 to 6 years. And I think that a good question, perhaps to have started with a year ago, but here we are tonight, is what does the community want in terms of the high school? We're talking about shifting our priorities to middle school, and you said in your presentation, high school, maintaining the high school, giving the high schoolers what they need because they've had so many cuts. Those are really good things to be thinking about, but it begs the question, do we want to be closing our elementary schools and getting rid of our more local early education for our youngest students to support a high school that we may be closing in 5 or 6 years? And this is just a rhetorical question tonight, but is this worth it? Are we willing to make these changes to save our high school now for a few more years or at all? Maybe if we're going to be really radical, we should be talking about going the whole hog and really saving money and closing our high school, putting our money in our younger students, and really looking at partnerships with other high schools that are succeeding or who really need students and are in the same boat that Virgins are in. I'm specifically thinking about Mount Abe's numbers. CVU and Middlebury are very highly rated high schools that maybe some of our families would like to have a relationship with. So I think in this conversation is what our long-term goals are for our high school students if Virgins High School is ultimately unlikely to go on much longer.
Thank you, Kate. I'm not sure that we're at a point yet where we can say this is what we want to do in 3 to 5 years. I'll open it if anybody wants to comment further, but I think we are all starting to think about that. But we're also starting to think about what next year's budget looks like if we can't get it passed. And so, there's this combination between short term, trying to think and understand it, versus the longer term, what do we do? Yeah.
If the high school's closed in 6 years, then we look back at our elementary school kids who are still here, and they're in a very different situation at that point than they are right now. And will we wish that we had, in 6 years, will we wish we were back in Ferrisburg at that point?
It's a really fair point, Kate. I wasn't trying to...
Especially if our population does go up in Ferrisburg and we're starting to reach or exceed capacity in Virgins.
Absolutely. It's a really fair point. I can't argue for or against it other than to say it's a good consideration. Anybody want to add anything?
That really is what the choices are or what the options are, right? That we sustain, maintain high school program offerings, or we continue to operate, or we raise taxes. To me, those are the paths forward. And so I think it's a very good point that you bring. And if faced with the option of cutting programs at the high school, I think it would probably be a preferred option, right? That our students have the opportunity to go to other high schools where they will have access to all of that programming.
Thanks. I'm going to get Una a chance. Una is one of our student reps, a new student rep, and she's got something to add.
Hi, so I'm the student rep. I'm a 10th grader at the high school. And I feel like as a rep, I need to address and say that high schoolers, we don't want our high school closed. And I get it, it's difficult. We all have connections to our schools, but between a high school and one of our elementary schools, we all end up at the high school eventually. And closing the high school would be extraordinarily detrimental. Part of the strength of our students is our smaller high school, and closing it would mean a large travel time for a lot of us, and quite frankly, other schools may not have room for us.
Okay, thank you very much, Una. So, smart thoughts and ideas on all sides of the opinion here, and thank you for the respectful dialogue. Rebecca is up next.
So I feel like what we haven't gotten at is the root problem, which is the declining enrollment. And it's clear that we have a lot of community engagement now. Everybody's here, and this is super exciting. We're at a new point where people are showing up to meetings, including myself. So I hope that maybe we could buy some time. There's a couple scenarios that buy us 1 to 2 years, and there's a lot of models that haven't been talked about. There's a lot of exciting things that can happen with schools that can draw people to our community. Burlington has a housing crunch. Ferrisburg just recently received a grant to change our zoning to build affordable housing. We could draw people to our community. It's 35 minutes down the road if we had an exciting model to bring them here. There are other options. Magnet schools are public schools that are free to the public in the district. They are specialized. You can either specialize in math or science or arts and language, or you can pick your specialty. They have extra funding by the government because they're specialized. They can draw students from other districts, and they serve everybody within the district. So this hasn't been talked about, and there's a lot of good ideas that haven't been talked about, like Kate's idea. So what we, I think, need to do is bring the community together and get all these ideas on board, and let's postpone this detrimental cut, which makes everybody upset. It's dividing our communities. Let's buy ourselves a little more time, 1 to 2 years. Let's explore some other options. Simultaneously, let's figure out scenario 3 in case that's where we need to go. Let's do the traffic study. Let's figure out all the numbers. Let's get the blueprints. Let's do that. Let's also explore, and let's have more meetings like this. So let's buy ourselves a different scenario. I don't think we can keep all schools open because that, I calculated, costs $30 a month for every taxpayer, unfortunately. But there are some other options where we can make some cuts and buy ourselves a year or 2 and come up with a model that's exciting, that we can all get behind, and that brings people to us instead of makes people move away, because that's what's going to happen, I think, with these 2 school closures.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Rebecca.
I'm Aunt Audie. I'm decently new to the community. I have a 2-year-old, and I'm a toddler teacher. I'm a toddler teacher in Shelburne. It's a very different community up there. But one of the things in talking to Rebecca, who's my almost next-door neighbor, that I have kind of come up with is, why are we not approaching preschools like my own? Heartworks preschool is based out of Shelburne, but we have 5 locations, and saying, hey, we have all this space, and it's not being utilized. They are classrooms. Would you like to come in and rent that space and operate a preschool? You mentioned something, I'm sorry, I don't remember your name, but you mentioned something earlier about, we could, rent out part of Addison. But has that conversation been had? And one of the things that Heartworks has done, so Heartworks has been around for 35 years, probably more, so longer than I've been alive. I've been working there, this is my 6th year there, and when I started there, it was the first year of the infant toddler program. They've been 3 through pre-K forever. They had the Renaissance School, and then Endeavor was an elementary and a middle school. Those have unfortunately closed because, again, declining enrollments. It was just too expensive. Renaissance was on Shelburne Farms, and that was amazing, and then they needed the space, and anyway. So, but then Heartworks is known, really well known, and it's an amazing program with amazing teachers, and we produce wonderful students who then enter the public schools. Well, a lot of preschools were closing because they changed the regulations. Home care and center-based preschools were closing. They couldn't afford to keep up with the new requirements for teachers. They couldn't afford to keep up with the just administrative costs. And so a bunch of preschools approached Heartworks and said, hey, we're about to close our doors, but the community needs us. Is there anything you can do? So Heartworks took over a parent co-op in Stowe. That was 5 or 6 years ago. And then a couple years ago, there's a spot in Montpelier. It was like Kid Country or something like that, connected to a life insurance company, and they were going to close. And it was apparently it was not run very well, and the parents weren't very happy. It had low enrollments. So Heartworks said, well, we could take you over, but we don't feel like we can just flip your curriculum. So they opened up LoveWorks. So there's Heartworks, and then there's LoveWorks. And LoveWorks is also a preschool program. However, it's similar to Heartworks, but not quite as, I guess, high-end. There was a kind of inappropriate joke that the old owner said, which was Heartworks is like the Lexus, and LoveWorks is like the Corolla. They have the same base, but there's more bells and whistles at Heartworks. And so they took over that one school. And then Leaps and Bounds was going to go under. And they said, hey, Heartworks, is there anything you can do for us? And so Heartworks took over Leaps and Bounds. And so we accrued maybe 5 more locations as LoveWorks. And so this is happening all over the state. It's not just Heartworks doing that. There are places that need care. I know that there's a need for care here. I mean, I drive all the way to Shelburne to work and to bring my daughter to school, and there are lots of people that do the same. So places like that are willing to have that conversation. And even if they're not willing to open up a school in this place, they might have the resources to say, you know, these are other people to talk to, or this is how you would start a preschool. And so I think it's worth investigating that on the elementary level. And then on the high school level, I know there's great vocational programs in Middlebury. I know there's great vocational, I think there's great vocational programs in Heinsberg, but I don't know of really much in the way of vocational programs here. So could we have part of the high school become a vocational center? And that could bring in, it would draw in more people, but it also could bring in some greater funding.
So to your point on pre-K and childcare, those are, yeah, but childcare, yes, we've discussed that, and in each of the scenarios that you'll see where we talk about closing a school, they all say close or repurpose, and it's those ideas are part of the repurpose part of that plan. So what we're trying to accomplish is sorting out our pre-K to 12 education first, and then think about ways that we can tap into those. So we've met with Mary Johnson out of Middlebury, for example, to do just what you're describing. They're a child care center, and got the ball rolling with that. I think those are excellent ideas, and again, would complement and attract people to our community. In terms of the Career Center, our students are the Career Center that you were speaking about in Middlebury is actually a regional career center, and our students go to that Career Center. So as do Mount Abe students and Middlebury students. So that's a regional collaborative career center for our students. So we already have those program options for kids.
So I'm not saying repurpose the building for preschool. I'm saying include it. So there's X number of classrooms not in use. Maybe it requires some restructuring of the building. Heartworks has had to do that when they've taken on a new center and remodeled in the building, but have income because we rent out part of the building as a preschool that is separate from the elementary school.
Yeah, I think those are the kinds of innovations we really need to be thinking of, and as Sheila mentioned, we're already starting that, so thank you. That's great. What's your name? You said Anne? Anne, nice to meet you. If you've got kids that are going to be entering school soon. We're going to be good friends at some point. So nice to meet you. I think there were some folks down the aisle on the right.
Hi, thank you. My name is Kara Quinn. I have lived in Virgins for, quite a few years now, and I have a son that's in 7th grade and a daughter that's in 4th grade. I'm also a teacher in Burlington, and I've been a teacher there for 17 years. I'm wondering if you can put up the slide for proposal 4B again, because similar to all the people that have spoken so far, I do think we need to buy ourselves a little bit of time. And I see that this proposal has 125% in Ferrisburg Central School, but I'm proposing looking at it maybe as a pre-K to 3 school and moving the middle one to a 4-8, and then the high school stays in a 9-12 with the central office moving into the high school. I know that you're probably not looking at new options, but I think that this addresses the issue that both what Kate is talking about, like strengthening the pre-K, and what Anne's talking about, maybe even housing some childcare or some childcare options in potentially what would be Addison Central School. I know that there's not a lot of room in the Ferrisburg School with that plan, but there would be room to kind of restructure within the high school and move 8th grade into the high school if need be, or 7th and 8th grade into the high school. And, you know, I think that you could shift things over as needed if the population started to change. And, you know, similar to what people are saying, I think that we really do need to put our efforts into pre-K to 3. I'm a 1st grade teacher. I taught kindergarten for 10 years before that, and the need is great there. I don't think that by closing a school that we can't do that. I think that we can by pooling our resources and putting all those pre-K to 3 teachers together and giving them opportunities to collaborate under one roof. I think that with a scenario like I just proposed, we still maintain that desire to really strengthen and honor the middle school level program, which is important to me because I don't want my 5th grader next year going to the high school. And I know that at the last school board meeting, Barb Fitzpatrick spoke about it because she has a granddaughter who really struggled with that. And I'm good friends with that child and observed that struggle. And I don't want that happening for any 5th graders or any 4th graders that, you know, would end up in the high school potentially. But I also have a son who's going to be in the high school in 2 years, and I don't want those programs cut either because I hear what the high schoolers are saying, and I hear that, you know, people want to be drawn to this community, and if we want people to come and to send their kids here, we have to have strong pre-K programs, we have to have strong middle school programs, and we have to have strong high school programs.
Thank you for the comments. I did want to just back up 2 slides to scenario 4 and see if that was close to what you were talking about. Or is there I know the grades were a little different, but I think the cutoff you said was 3 versus, or 4 versus 3.
Close, and I mean, I think that maybe if it's a pre-K to 2, but then, you know, you have to look at middle school differently because then you're looking at 3 to potentially 8.
Right. Sure.
6, 7, 8, here it's 7, 8, 5, 8. You know, I mean, we can make it whatever we want it to be. Right.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate the comment. We had some folks in the back with their hands up first, Ben, and then we'll come back up. Yeah, I'm trying to go in order of the hands. So there are 2 folks in the back, and then we'll come back up to you, Ms. Armstrong.
Hi, I'm Michelle Houghton. I was just wondering if you guys could talk a little bit about the term minimal reconstruction that was in, I'm not sure which scenario, but specifically I'm concerned with scenario 3, 4, and 5. I think we're all maybe feeling like if we're going to consolidate to scenario 3 and then find out next year we have to do a $2.5 million expansion, that's not going to be cool. So Can you just, what's minimal reconstruction for those 3 scenarios? That'd be great.
I think that we have some postings of the school maps online that you can reference. So in one of the examples, we take a larger classroom and we divide it into 2, and that's something that actually happened at the high school last year. It was something that our custodial team was able to do themselves. I think as well, if we move central office, for example, into the high school, and we talked about making the safety changes to the building to make sure that people that come in from the public can't just wander into parts of the school where students are. You know, it's about creating a wall or perhaps a bathroom in a part of the building where there currently isn't one. So those are the kinds of changes we might need to make. Some changes to a parking lot to accommodate additional parking. I don't know, Ken is here, he's in the back, I'm looking at him. Ken, is there anything you'd want to add to that?
I think it's a good question, really good question, and I don't think we have numbers right now to be able to, you know, lay out all these scenarios or hypotheticals of where we're at. And I think, like Sheila originally said, we're at the point where we're still trying to decide. So I don't have a really good answer other than they're not major changes to the buildings. They're pretty small, like putting in petitions or carving out square footage of underutilized spaces. So that might mean something like taking a library and utilizing some space. Or it might mean, unfortunately, maybe removing a space that's underutilized in the high school. Pete's gonna hate what I have to say, but if we had to have space, there might be something like the wrestling room, for instance, in the high school that could potentially be reutilized for classroom space, that kind of stuff. Excuse me. We're not talking about $1 million renovations, but the costs with contractors that I have spoken with will be reduced by utilizing the footprints that we have and trying to utilize the space. So some of the conversations we've had with Banwell Architects is, you know, that reduces the cost significantly per square foot in whatever renovation. We do need more consulting from architectural firms to kind of to firm up this whole idea, but we need a plan that the community agrees on first. And I think that's where it really goes.
Thank you, Ken. Michelle, somebody next to you, was it Jen? Did you have a question? Oh, sorry, wrong way.
Hi, my name's Lucy. I work in a middle school that recently reconfigured just within the confines of our building, and in the research that we did, I think it's pretty evident that the more times students change buildings, the kind of worse the outcomes are. Not for every child, but for some children. So I think I just wanted to mention that as something for people to consider. That options that have maybe 3 transitions between physical buildings just tend to have some cons associated with them. My specific question is, I see approximated savings on all these. I just was curious about where those savings come from. Are they all from the closure of the building? And, you know, are teacher positions lost? Are teacher positions lost?
So yes, the vast majority of the costs that go down when we close a building is not the building itself. From the pie charts, you can see the vast majority of what we pay for in our current expenditures is our salaries and benefits. So the cost reductions are primarily staffing. There are other things that we gain in efficiencies between the districts. We depending on the situation with transportation, that could go,
up or down. In most of these scenarios, it looks like it goes up and not down, or stays flat. But there are other costs that go down, but the vast majority of them are staff members, teacher salaries, benefits, support staff. There's even, consideration to all the other departments also, and not just teaching staff.
Thank you. Right here in the middle, and then over to Finn. Diane, did you have a question? I didn't know if you were... No. Okay, thank you.
Is he going to let me talk now?
Your turn. I'm sorry.
My turn. Elizabeth Armstrong, West Addison, lakefront property that's taxed to death. I am so pleased with this group of young ladies up here. My comment last night, we don't have any marketing. Now, I'm a business major, BS in accounting and tax. We don't have any marketing, ladies. These people don't know what marketing is, but you do. You're talking about housing. We need housing. And you got your zoning. We need to get our select boards going, and they've sat idle and back and have done nothing, as far as I'm concerned, to promote our towns. People come here for fresh air. They come for skiing. They come for the lake. And if you've lived in smog cities like I have, you can't breathe. There's smog's over the city, and say, "Ooh, I'm breathing that stuff." They come up here for fresh air. People go to work every day. Where are those kids going? We need people in the school areas that are available to take care of those children. That is a perfect opportunity to zip up our numbers, promote our schools, get people in the area. And they're ready to come. There's jobs here. We need housing, so we need to put up a marketing committee, and that's what I would like to ask the board to do. These three ladies and other people in this room are dynamic. Take care, use them. We need them. And let's form a committee with them that can help and assist the board members to promote our schools.
Thank you, Ms. Armstrong. Yeah, and we talked a little bit about this yesterday. Finn will be next up, Ben, if you want to head over. We talked about this a little bit yesterday. We've had lots of conversations lately with select boards and city councils who have the same concern. And I think, just speaking for myself personally, in the last few weeks, I've had more conversations with select board folks about these kinds of things than I ever did in the several years tenure I had when it was just a Ferrisburg school board. So I think we hear what you're saying. I mean, that you're absolutely right, and I think we're taking action on that, and we need to pursue that further. Anybody else have anything to add on that? Great, thank you. Oh, so whether a formal committee is necessary? Well, we can certainly talk about that. This isn't the place for us to make a vote on that, but that doesn't mean we're not taking your suggestion seriously. Thank you. Yeah, all right. I know it would be easy to fill that committee, absolutely. It'd be hard, yeah. The challenge would be limiting it, I think. All right, thank you. I'd like to turn it over to Finn for our next question.
Thank you for taking my question. My name is Finn Yarborough. I'm a resident of Ferrisburg, and I have 3 children in this school system currently. I've said a lot about this online. I said it at the last meeting. I'll speak again tomorrow. All I want to say tonight is to maybe run interference on what I think is some dangerously fuzzy thinking, specifically around the numbers. It seems pretty clear, with no offense intended, that little to no research has been put into how much these, for example, the building modifications are actually going to cost. And I understand that usually comes later in the process when you're budgeting. But given that the main selling point of any of these closures is, in fact, how much money it's going to save, to have such a radical change to lose a school in a community, in order for us to really be able to support it, we need to see credible data that it's actually going to save that amount of money. Now, I know that the budgets are hard to interpret because they were it's a little bit of a cup and shell game trying to compare the way they're written now to the way they were written prior to consolidation, but we do spend more on administration now than we did prior to consolidation, no matter how you cut it. And that's troubling, because one of the only reasons the town of Ferrisburg agreed after failing to vote for Act 46 was with the promise that it would result in administrative efficiencies. And by the numbers, it hasn't. I know we've been able to save some programs together and have bigger sports teams and things like that, but we spend more money now than we did, and promises without hard data, we won't be convinced that that's actually going to save the amount of money that's being presented to us. Particularly with regards to framing, we cite that the language from the board is that we're prioritizing programs over buildings. And that's very appealing, but per the data that you've shown us, it's not actually the buildings that are causing extra expense, it's personnel. So I'm really interested in options that involve keeping community schools open, even though I don't applaud the idea of reductions in personnel, particularly teaching personnel. If that's what needs to happen, it is possible to keep schools open with fewer teachers. And if the fact that the schools are open are not what's making our budget too high, it seems that closing them, assuming that that's the only way to reduce teaching staff, is not true. There are lots of educational models that have to do particularly with combined classrooms or peer-based learning, where older children and younger children can learn side by side with specialized breakout groups. We already have a very robust intervention program in the school that could be modified to support that, in my opinion. I went to Montessori for many years as a younger child, and that's an example of how that works with reduced teaching staff. At the risk of taking too much of everybody else's time, the last thing I wanted to raise a flag about, last two things, sorry. Building capacity versus per pupil spending, we're using those terms interchangeably, and we shouldn't. Because how many students a building can fit doesn't really have a direct relationship to the per pupil spending necessarily. So when we say that Ferrisburg is at 41% capacity, that has no bearing on how much money Ferrisburg is spending on its students per pupil, particularly with regards to the fact that the birth rate in our town, in Ferrisburg anyway, is completely stable. Students who have not yet entered the public school system, ages 0 through 5, average over 20 students, over 20 children born per year in this town alone. Not all of them will go to public school, but many of them will. And so we have a full class for every grade for 5 years running in this school. That casts doubt on the idea of a population trend which continually declines. That may be what's happening statewide. I didn't see any citation on that graph, which is a little troubling. I'd like to see what the methodology is behind that study. How do we project into the future just by looking into the past? It takes some pretty complicated math, and I'd like to see what that is. The last thing I'd like to say is that if we really feel like we can't run an elementary school here with over 100 students enrolled, K through 6, what makes us think that we can run a high school that's projected to have fewer than 100 students 5 years from now, which is something that was, I don't know if there's math behind that either, but that was something that was put forward potentially during the presentation. These are all, like, this is not, I'm not really advocating for any particular solution at this point, except that my priority is to keep this school open. But this is critical reflection that we really need to do before making these decisions, not sort of assuming it's going to work itself out because it seems like closing buildings must save money, when in fact it may not at all. And what we may lose may cost more in the process. Thank you for letting me go over my time limit.
And I think those were comments, so I didn't hear a question in there, so, but thank you for the comment. I think right 2 rows back we've got.
My name is Jeanette. I am a 5-generational Hill resident up on Shell House Mountain Road. I don't want to see any schools close, but what I want to see is an administration and a school system that starts working with all of us instead of at us. This is the second time in less than 3 years that I have been, for lack of better terms, lambasted with, this is what we're doing, guys, get used to it. There's no community input until it's too late. We're all standing here the night before the school board is going to vote on something that, where was this 6 months ago? Now, I saw a chart about this went out, that went out. I check my mail, I read my email, I see little snippets, but nothing that led me to believe that at this point in time we were going to be told we had days, weeks, maybe a month to decide what we're going to do with our district. So what I'm asking is that the school board, as another resident over here said, slow the roll just a little bit. Give us a month or 2 months or 3 to see these statistics. What is parking going to look like at Virgins Elementary School when I can't pick my kid up there when she's swimming in the summer, let alone how many buses will be rolling through there on a daily basis? What is it going to look like for 3 or 5 years from now when, as we were just pointed out, Ferrisburg residents are actually producing babies? Yay. We're bringing more residents in. My husband is a transplant from Chittenden County, and he wouldn't go back for anything. So that's it.
Thanks, Jeanette. Appreciate the comments. What I mostly heard is that your daughter likes to swim, and I'm wondering when she's going to join our team, but we can talk about that later. Thank you. Another hand up here in the front, please.
My name's Barbara Wilmette. I've taught for 46 years, retired now, grandparent of 2 new Ferrisburgers who moved here in July and go to this school. I remember at some previous schools, and I can't remember the answer. I was also on the school board a short time. What's the state obligation? What is our legal obligation for transportation? I'm thinking that maybe community members could be, people pass through town all the time and working together to be sure kids get to whatever schools they need to, and we might save a huge chunk there.
Thank you. Yeah, the very quick answer to that is there is no state or federal mandate that we have a transportation program, and that it's something that I think the board has done for decades because of equity issues, that not all families have the means to get their kids to school. So that's not to counter your point, but just to point out why we do that. But your point's well taken, and I love your grandkids. They're great kids. Thanks. I'm gonna keep going because not everybody's had a chance to. Yeah, I apologize, Ann. Sorry. Right up here.
Hi, I'm Liana Tennell. I live in Virgins, and I'm going to go ahead and speak since our meeting is later after that. So I'm the parent of a 7th grader and a 4th grader, and I just want to share my observations of how they are right now in the school. And I don't. So what I've seen, I see in the 4th grade class, which is this amazing class, I see kids who are very settled in. They're really happy in that elementary school in Virgins. They feel like they're coming into their own. They're not the little kids anymore. They're like the solid medium kids, and they're starting band. They're looking forward to the things they get to do in 5th grade and 6th grade, and they're like my 4th grader. He knows all the teachers in the school. He loves everybody. He can name all the classrooms. When I mentioned about the extra classrooms, he's like, oh yeah, but not really, because this room is used for the reading, and that's where they go for reading. And in this room, and he knew what was happening in every single room, and he said, he had very strong feelings about how things ought to go, and that he should be at this school for another 2 years. And he said they should ask the kids. They need to ask the kids about this. Then my 7th grader, and I saw the 6th graders last year sort of owning the school and also really excited about something new, and I feel like I could just see that developmental change in them, that they were ready for middle school. They were like, let's go. We're ready for next year. We're ready to go. And the timing of it seemed quite perfect. Starting middle school in 7th grade, it just seems right. And the other thing that I've seen for my daughter is that the coming together of 3 schools, it brings possibility for kids. You've gotten to know a group of people, and maybe they have a limited idea of who you are, or they have a set picture of this is this kid, this is what she was like in 1st grade or whatever. And when you have the 3 schools coming together, there's this new possibility, and I've seen her gravitate toward kids from Ferrisburg and have these new relationships that, and I've seen that happening with other people too in the school. It's like something, it just seems like a really good time for them to be meeting a new group of people and taking on that, they seem ready to take on the new responsibility of managing this more complex schedule. And I don't see that in the 5th graders. I don't think, it doesn't seem like that's where they are at all. And I see that opportunity of the schools coming together and meeting new people. I see that as a loss. And I also, I heard a couple times equity being referred to as meaning the same, and I don't think that that's true. I think that a school, to have its own personality and its own something that works for it, doesn't mean that everybody has to be doing the same thing at the same time.
That's right.
Different opportunities. I think it's okay for schools to be different. So, thanks.
Thank you. You tell Willard anytime he wants to come to one of these boring meetings, he can tell us what I would love to hear from him. That's great. But thank you for the comments. I appreciate it. Caroline had her hand up earlier. Did you still want to comment, or did you have? Okay. Yeah. Go ahead. We'll give you the mic. We'll make it official.
Hi, Caroline Griffin. So my husband and I bought property in Ferrisburg 11 years ago. We moved here from New York City. I was like, get me out. I have 2 little kids, help. In that time, I've seen 8 homes been built in a half-mile radius of my house, and I still have 10 acres. People are building, they're moving in. You know, we need young people from Burlington, young families, and I think that it would be very short-sighted of us to close down our elementary school. I mean, if you're saying that we have this great track record of retaining children from K through 12, if we're going to close these schools, you're going to see people leaving. You're going to see kids being sent to other schools. And then where are those kids then who are supposed to go to the high school? I think you need to just keep the foundation of the elementary schools really strong, and I firmly believe that.
Thank you. I think I see, was it Dina or, oh, sorry, Chief Collette, right behind Dina, and then we'll move over. And I see a gentleman in the back, too.
You don't have to call me Chief, Bill.
Oh, you're
title
of respect.
Thanks. Aaron Collette, yes, I do work for the Burlington Fire Department, but you don't have to address me by
yes, sir.
Chief. Thank you. My question is this, and I kind of echo Finn's concern, is that I'm concerned that the proposals are myopic in that when we only know what we know and haven't had a non-biased third party, and I hate the word consultant because there's always a money thing there, and there's no way Ken's going to have data on his stuff too because we don't have those answers. But I think a third party with great innovation and options and a future that has research and data that drives this is probably going to be something that I can tolerate a little bit better than what I'm seeing so far.
Thank you, Aaron. We're going to go right to the back and then come over to you next. And then Lou will get you in there as well. Gentleman in the back. Thank you.
Yeah, my name's Tim Davis. I've had a couple kids come through the school and are in the system. If I heard that right, if the Ferrisburg school closes for $1, the school will go to the town of Ferrisburg. Is that correct?
Well, to clarify, the way it works is if the district wants to cease using the school for educational purposes, it requires a vote of the town to agree with that. If that happens, the district still can retain ownership of the building and property if it still has a purpose, an operational purpose for the district, which could include using it for the district office. If we decide not to use it for any purposes and we no longer want the property at all, then the option goes to the town to purchase it for $1. After another vote.
And it's debt.
Yes, after another vote.
It gets it for $1 with any accompanying debt. Is that correct?
There's a caveat on that. Is it debt acquired after a certain point, or is it any debt here?
Yes, so the debt that they actually had before consolidation, if any, is what goes along with the building to the town. So for instance, Addison had no associated debt before consolidation, so they had no debt that goes along with the building. Ferrisburg does have two pre-existing pre-consolidation loans, one that pays off, does it say when? One that pays off in November of 2021, and the second that doesn't pay off until November of 2030. So there are two existing loans for Ferrisburg,
And
but
what's
the newest renovation that was done by the district and that affected all the schools in the district, that would still remain with the district no matter if they sell the buildings or not. That does not travel with the building.
I'm going under the assumption, from what I've already seen, that turning around and selling a school is not as easy as you might think. The town of Ferrisburg inherited some property right off Route 22A and Route 7 that we've been sitting on for years from the state of Vermont that still sits vacant, and the state doesn't pay us any taxes on it. So if there's any debt that's associated with this school that would be carried over to the town of Ferrisburg, or for that matter that will carry on with the district, that's got to be included in the calculation, because assuming that what you're really looking for in a best case scenario is $2 million. It's $2 million that you're looking for 5 years. You got to start doing some pretty strong subtracting when you subtract the debt, whether the town of Ferrisburg's got to gut that, or whether the district that's still responsible for budgets has got to digest those loans. They're still carrying on. And we haven't even gotten into cutting, starting to subtract transportation costs, future renovation costs, and all those are valid. But in today's world, renovating, transportation, debt service, all add up when you're looking at a $2 million nut. And by the time you shave that down, my gut feeling is that that number is going to start to shrink. And I mean, look, 12 years ago, there was a group of elementary school teachers that tried to push towards some reform for the health care. And I was part of a team that did a presentation to Addison County Regional, the district. And it got shot down because of the union. And I look at this now, and I look at the continuing cost of the health care when the teachers and the folks driving buses or working as staff in these schools are looking at a 3% raise, and we're looking at, oh boy, we really dodged the bullet by not getting hit with an 11.1 increase. Instead, we're getting whacked with 12.9%. Well, that's been going on for 10 years. When you start to add that up over the years and the percentage that makes of salaries, that's a big number. You could easily, you start subtracting that from that $2 million, now there's a big chunk of your 5-year plan right there. So I guess what I'm saying is it looks to me like there really is some uncovered consequences here when you look at the cost of floating a bond for $2 million to buy you 5 years, to buy you some time to explore, whether it's a marketing committee or waiting for more people to move to Ferrisburg because you got to build them some houses, or for some babies to get older. No matter what it is, you're talking about $2 million. And in the grand scheme of things, when you start spreading that out and you float a bond, and even if you use the bond to pay off some of this debt that may be at a higher interest rate, all kinds of scenarios start to unfold that may look a lot better than the turmoil of closing a school. And I personally think one of them, and this is just a personal bent, that the ongoing, despite what our governor thinks, the ongoing cost shift driving these medical care costs and health insurance is absolutely unsustainable. And if you're running a business and you're giving your employees 3 to 4% raises, which they're not getting, I mean, I don't think anybody's getting over 3% here, and yet the health care cost is going up 12.9%, that's just, that can't keep going. I mean, that was the first slide. That's what struck me, and that's why I mention it now. So something's got to happen there with the union. I don't know who's responsible for that or if there's somebody here that's already addressed it. But between that and the ongoing carry of the debt, that has to be subtracted from the money you're trying to raise, right? Because if there's ongoing debt, whether it's absorbed by the district or by the town.
So I can speak to that a little bit. So in the initial projections that we did for maybe our board retreat in August, we had some preliminary savings figures on different scenarios. And then when we extrapolated them out and we found out that indeed it is a secondary vote that allows the district to sell or not to sell the buildings, even if a school is closed, we put forth numbers and projections in two different ways, whether we keep a building or whether we sold that building. And so the numbers that you saw up here tonight for these different scenarios actually assume that we are keeping the building, which means we have the debt payments in those numbers already, as if we are keeping them and we are paying them and not the town. So if for some reason the town did buy back those buildings and assume that debt, then we would save more money than what those quotes are.
All right, thank you. I've got somebody right here in the front, in the middle, and I'm going to maintain the speaking order because we have about 10 minutes left. So we'll go here, Melanie in the back, Dr. Fraunholm, I think is the next. So we've got 3 people stacked up. Thank you.
So
4
I
people.
have 2 questions about the high school situation.
Lou, I'm sorry. I better write this down. You may proceed. I'm sorry.
The first one is what a 5th grader's day would look like in Virginia's Union High School. So do they get bused with 18-year-olds? Do they sit down and eat lunch with 18-year-olds? Do they end up in the bathroom? Is my 5th grade boy going to be in the bathroom with an 18, 19-year-old kid? Like, I just have a question about how that's going to look. That's my first question. My second question is, apparently, according to all these numbers, I might not even have to worry about that as a mother of a 2-year-old because there's a potential that the high school won't even exist anymore. And if that does happen, how do you or who redistricts the high schools and where would the kids go, I guess is another question. And who's responsible for that?
So I'll try to be brief. With the middle level question, through scheduling, the students wouldn't be eating lunch together or they wouldn't be in the cafeteria at the same time. That would be done through scheduling, and there is a designated middle level wing, so that's where the students would be of the same age group. So in terms of the high school, busing, so they ride buses now with students. They get dropped off at the elementary school and continue on to the high school or vice versa. So, so that already happens. In terms of what happens with the high school and how those decisions get made, you're asking if we further merge? Is that what you're asking, or are you asking if we close the school? Because those are 2 different things. Mm-hmm.
Both of those are viable options for the future projected from 15 years from now.
So in the scenario where you make the decision to no longer educate students in 9 through 12, there are a couple of different options. You can designate schools as your tuition location for those students. So you could, that would be based on capacity and so forth. Or there can be free choice, so students can access whichever school they want. So you can designate specific schools or they can have choice. That's one. If we further merge with another district, that would be part of what I would compare to your Act 46 Articles of Agreement. So the process that you went through to create the rules around how this district would be formed, that same process would happen with whatever district we were going to join with next. So through that process, I'm guessing we would define how we're going to use the buildings, including the high school. Whether we would maybe think that we want to keep both high schools open, or maybe we would decide that we want to close one and have students go to another.
They wouldn't break up the district, like send Ferrisburg to
Right, right. That's why I asked which you were referring to.
All right, we're going to go with Lou McLaren next, and then we'll bounce back to Melanie, Dr. Fromhold, and Jess up front.
Hi, I'm Lou McLaren. I've lived here for a while, and my kids have gone through Ferrisburg and in high school as well. So I guess one observation is going to be small, polite chastising, and the other is going to be a question. Every single school board meeting is open to the public. Every single school board meeting's minutes are on the websites. I think they're also being taped somehow. For several years, I came to the school board meetings here at Ferrisburg every month. There was usually one other person with me. So I am a little frustrated if you feel that you are getting this sprung on you. Our declining enrollment figures have been sported and sold and sung and yelled by the boards for years. This isn't news. I don't know why any of you might think it's a surprise. It's not. So I would encourage you to stay engaged now going forward, but please don't feel like this is something new. So that's my snark. I apologize. I'm not trying to offend any of you, but none of you have been at the board meetings with me. And a number of you, except Dina. You do not need to have a kid in the school system to come to board meetings because you're a taxpayer. Okay. Okay, please, don't try, this is, just take it for what it's worth. Now my question, we're all talking aspirational. I'm hearing that there's a $955,000 issue we need to solve for the next fiscal year, and the discussions we're having are really looking at future state. We can't build houses overnight. We cannot convince people to have babies. The babies need to grow up. So if we don't close any schools for the next fiscal year, and we have to find $955,000, and I don't want the high school programs to be the scapegoat, what will you do? Can you basically cut staff at every of the 3 elementary schools to bring down the spend? Can you mate it any way other than cutting the high school programs? I don't hear anyone talking about the immediate issue, and I care about the immediate issue. Where'd you go?
I'm not sure if that was more of a comment or if it is a question. I mean, I don't know, and that's why we're here. In terms of your question about reducing staff at our existing elementary schools, we've already implemented our class size policy. So we, to the best of our ability, have class sizes within the optimal minimum range. In some of our schools, we're below that. We have class sizes that are smaller than our policy, but reducing staff, there's one teacher of those grades, or the 2 grades in some cases. So we might have a 3-4, or we can't really reduce any further without getting some very odd and difficult configurations, you know, like a 2-3-4 or a 4-5-6, you know, those kinds of configurations become very challenging in implementation. So I think we've also reduced staff by carving away FTE, you know, 0.2 of a library media specialist or a 0.2 of a nurse, and I feel like it's very difficult to continue to make those kinds of cuts. So at the elementary level, nothing really comes to mind, and certainly nothing that would equal $955,000.
Thank you. And Lou echoed that that's her point. Just to echo something that Lou said before we move on to Melanie's question, you can watch these live in some cases, or watch them afterwards through RETN. Shout out to the 44 some odd people who are actually watching live right now, which is hard to imagine because I thought everybody was here. Like, it's pretty big. All right, so I'm just going to stick with the people we have on the speaking order. We have 3 more questions, and then we'll do a quick wrap up. If you really need to leave before then, please do fill out an exit survey. And before you do, one of the questions the exit survey asks is what your favorite scenario is. And if you're not clear on what those are, just check in with one of us and we'll help you. And Melanie, take it away.
Thanks. So I just have a question about scenario 3 and scenario 4. In the original meeting minutes, they both saved $2.2 million. But in the recent proposals, scenario
4 dropped significantly. Can you please explain what that drop is? The first scenario, only a couple thousand maybe, but that's a huge difference. And I'm just nervous that if we are projecting incorrectly early on, are we still projecting incorrectly? So if you can explain that, I would really appreciate it. And then I have another question. I have lots of questions actually, but I'm only gonna ask a couple. The second is I'd like to understand what the justification is for moving 5th grade up. I completely get 6 through 8, and I've read a lot of the research. 6 through 8 makes sense. It seems like we're only moving 5th grade up because we can't fit it in the elementary school. Even in the research that Sheila actually has online, it says there's psychological development differences between 10 and 11 and 12 and 15-year-olds. So I'd really like to understand why we're moving them up. It doesn't make any sense to me. And then the final one is, I've looked at the configurations, and it's clear that we can fit pre-K through 4 at Virgins. I've talked to Matt, everything's good there. I've looked at the configurations for the middle school wing. That's just crazy. I mean, we are pulling out the special eds, we're pulling out RRC, we're cutting the science lab in half, and one of the reasons for middle school is let's have science labs for our kids. We're doing things contrary to what we want. Like, if we really want to increase our commitment to middle school kids, we cannot cram them into a space that's insufficient, and I feel like that's what we're doing when we're trying to move 6th grade up. So questions and comments, I guess, there.
Okay, so I think I can only answer the first one of those. So in regards to the savings, when we were first projecting and say at the August meeting with the boards and we had a few scenarios on the table, I think it was just 1, 2, 3, 4 that we started with. The first step we took was to do a configuration of where are our staff, what are the numbers of FTEs in each category, in each school building, and then walk through those scenarios and try to figure out how many staff members would we need in each building, in each scenario after that took place. And when we did that, we came up with the FTEs of what those scenarios would mean. Now, instead of taking real people, and by real people, I mean the real staff that are in your buildings and how much I cost or how much you cost or whatever in that building, because we didn't know at the time what positions would stay and what positions would leave or be, you know, a RIF in a reduction in force. Basically, because of seniority or because of licensure, we have to walk through that whole process to figure out which are the staff that would stay. And so without doing that, we took an average number of what it costs us for a teacher with salary and benefits and used that against those FTEs. So when you saw that 2.2 million, those are based on an average staff member's salary and benefits, and all the other costs are estimated based on those projections. But that's where that came from. Since then, we took those FTEs and applied them to a more realistic actual figures for what our people really cost us in each building instead of average numbers. Then we also considered, are we keeping the buildings or are we not, and adjusted some of those numbers, and that's where you're seeing the projections go down from that number to get closer to what it would really mean in those scenarios with the actual staffing we have. So yes, that's a very good question, and I don't know where that's written. I think it's maybe a note on one of the spreadsheets that I have. So one of the reasons why I did actually leave in the rent of the superintendent's office is not because the assumption was that we would stay renting. The reason was, as we're looking at all of these scenarios and trying to configure something in one of the buildings, we figure that in at least year one, so FY21, if this happens, if we close a school or 2 schools and we try to move into one of the buildings, that there would be some reconfiguration, possible parking lot changes. So some cost would be associated with that and the physical move. We have a lot of technology and things like that in our office space, not just furniture, that would have to be moved in a pretty quick fashion because our lease is actually up this coming year. And we have to notify our landlords when we're leaving. So the only reason why that cost was left in there is not to say we're going to continue to rent. It's to say that at least in year one, there's going to be a cost associated with that move, whatever we end up being able to do.
I think in terms of the middle level, I mean, there's not a scenario void of change, right? So that's a given. And yeah, and I think when you finished your statements, you said, is that, so for that reason, I don't support moving the 6th grade up or something to that fashion. I think you meant 5th grade, right? I think you were speaking more specifically to why are you including the 5th grade. Right, right. So there are, you know, the definition of middle level is really about the developmental stages. It's not about where we decide to call it middle school. So the national definition for middle level is 5 through 9 because that represents that period of developmental growth. So when considering what to do, really, we were trying to prioritize the maintenance of programming and some of those other things that were listed as the goals and objectives. So one of the reasons why we considered 5th grade was because of space and because of that, but also because there are a lot of models that are 5 through 8. It gives students 4 years in a middle level, which can be either one house sort of structure where you have the 4 grades, 5 through 8, similar to what happens in Williston and other places, or you can do the teaming approach where you have a 5-6 team and then you move up to the 7-8 team. So it gave more of those options when bringing up and having an even number 5 through 8. So those were some of the considerations. So in terms of space, I mean, as we discussed earlier today, we talked about the fact, sorry, I get you guys confused, like stop. we used to house far more, we'll talk later. We used to have far more students in the school than what we're even proposing. So while it represents a big change from how we use the space now, we can do this. Like, it's not beyond, it's just different than what we do now. And I think that that's why people are having the hardest time with it. It's just like we can't imagine ourselves using the space differently. So we had far more students there and we weren't using those classrooms for all of the multiple purposes we use them for now. So.
Space creatively, but why are we pushing and having to use space creatively when we have room in the elementary schools? It just doesn't make any sense to me, and I just can't understand the reasoning other than you just want to be able to keep everybody in elementary school, like one-to-one.
Thank you for the question. No, it's okay. We do have to get to a couple more, so I'm going to cut you off, even if it makes it a difficult ride home. Yeah, maybe anybody else going to South Middlebrook by any chance? But there are more opportunities tomorrow to talk, and of course, you can always email. I do want to get Dr. Fromhold and Jess a chance to ask a quick question. I really appreciate people staying a little bit later. We should be able to wrap it up soon. It's all yours, Karen.
Thanks so much. Hi, Karen Fromhold. I'm a resident of Ferrisburg and mom of a first grader here in Ferrisburg. So I just have a comment. So I have really words of appreciation and then concern. So my appreciation goes to all of you for the presentation. This was really thoughtful, and I appreciated the time that went into that. And then I think appreciation to everyone here. I think for all the critical thinking, creative thinking, ideas. I especially appreciated, I don't remember your name up front here, talking about your the voice of bringing the voice of your kids into this. And I do think that is a voice that is missing. And I think that's very, very important. So my concern is about the process. And knowing that there's a board meeting tomorrow night, I think this is great. There's this handout for us to fill out. What do we think is the best proposal? There's actually a third. I know I was at part of the meeting last night in Addison. There's an upcoming meeting in Virgins, which occurs after your board meeting tomorrow. I think there's so much input from the community that is very valuable and necessary. I would encourage and implore the board to let the community input inform your thought and decision making. I am very concerned that I don't know what the process will be tomorrow. Last meeting I was at the last meeting and there was a a thought and a motion to move forward with putting forward the proposal, and I think that's you know, the option 3, and that was what sort of got a lot of people sort of very interested and concerned about this, because that was put out there, not this sort of array of all these different options. So I don't know where that's going to go forward tomorrow, but I just want to express concern about the process and the speed that this is going forward, knowing that there's a meeting tomorrow night, which I don't think has been very well publicized, and that the next community meeting with Virgins is going to happen after that, and I have a concern about that. So I just hope this community input is really taken into account as the board moves forward with this process.
Thank you for that feedback. Appreciate it. I'm going to hand this to Jess, and I'll come and get that. Jess James.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jessica James. I'm on the Ferrisburg Select Board. I have spoken to so many people in our community about this, and I'm so happy to see all the creativity that has come forth, and the fact that we all feel very rushed, and it's very hard, but I know that collectively we are going to do what's best for our community, and we have elected these people on our school board to do what we're asking them to do, is to be leaders. And I would love to have a better relationship with every single one of you on a professional level on our boards as well, and I feel like it only has occurred in the last couple months. And speaking from the town point, we have done so much for Ferrisburg, and we're trying to work on what we're doing in our community, and I think that we have to really work together and take the time to do this properly. Thank you.
Thank you, Jess. I think just a quick word about the exit surveys from Christina.
Okay, Ben was going to do the closing arguments. Whoa, I should be home watching SUV, right? Sorry about that. It's been a long night. He had to leave to go do homework. So thank you all so very much for coming tonight. I just can't tell you how great it is to see all of you here. And as Lou pointed out, I was one of those people that attended a ton of board meetings too back in the high school days, and I would only be the only person in the audience, basically. So here we go, right? Thank you for all your questions, concerns, passion. I think I speak for all of us up here. We feel the same way. But unfortunately, we have a big decision to make. So tomorrow night, we are scheduled to meet and vote. However, who knows what's going to happen tomorrow night, but join us. It's at the high school at 6 o'clock. It was on the postcard that got mailed to every house. It's on the website. It's. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. You are right. It wasn't on the postcard, but it's been posted in a lot of other places. My apologies. 6 o'clock at the high school in the library. Oh, we're going to be in the auditorium? Okay. Auditorium, sorry. Yep. Especially if all of you come tomorrow night, then we will be in the auditorium, yeah. But thank you. Please take the time to fill out an exit card, and many of us will be here for a bit if you want to come up and talk to us or ask us any more questions. So thank you.